Welcome back, everybody. My name is still Gabby Snyder, but this time I am joined by the return of Stefan Mott. Stefan, how's it going?
Pretty good. That last set sure was something. How are you feeling after casting that one, Gabby?
Honestly, I'm feeling a little worn down. I feel like one of those Incineroar that was brought in, used fake out, intimidated, and then immediately retreated a few times. It's almost like you're running laps, and sometimes in those games you definitely have to remember what lap you're on, and you're not just running for the rest of your life. But we have made it to the final match of the day, and
Yep.
as long and as mind gamey as the previous match was, we are still in a position where there's a lot on the line. So why don't you walk us through that, Stefan?
Well, we covered it a little bit at the very beginning of the stream, but a lot of this, it's kind of like no breaks, no holds barred, just going at it with teams trying to guarantee their way into the round of 16 already, despite it only being week 2 of the group stage. And that's no different here. We have Singapore versus Italy. This is the group right now. You can see they're both sitting on 3 points, as is Indonesia after a pretty impressive 8-0 win over Panama. But we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about the final match in Singapore versus Italy, where it currently stands as a 4-3 advantage for Italy. So a win here effectively guarantees Italy their spot in the round of 16. Now, Singapore, if they can pull off a tie against Italy, that's an incredible accomplishment. I mean, Singapore's already been doing a great job this entire World Cup. They're one of those teams where they're just beating back really good teams pretty consistently, and taking Italy to a tie would be an incredible result for them.
Yeah, and if anybody's going to be able to do that against an accomplished player as Flavio del Pidio, it's going to be Melvin Kay, who is equally accomplished from the Singapore region. We have the pleasure of seeing a world's caliber match to ratchet up a world caliber match to wrap up the week. Gotta work on those enunciations and those consonants a little bit clearly after this match is done. But let's go ahead and take a look at the teams that both Melvin and Flavio will be bringing. Flavio representing Italy once again, no stranger to the international stage, winning the European International Championships in 2019, getting top 8 in the North American International Championships in 2019 as well. Running a very curious Xerneas team with Incineroar, Entei, and Didi, Venusaur, and Torkoal as support Pokemon, which is a complete 180-degree twist from what we saw in the previous round with Xerneas.
Yeah, and it's not very often that you see a triple fire on a team, which is kind of interesting as well. Personally, I mean, one of the things that's really different about this as well is the Indeedee, right? We saw there was, of course, redirect in the Xerneas team in the last set, but it was all Rage Powder stuff, which can, of course, be mitigated by something like a Goggles Roar, which the Incineroar was running on Shohei's side. Roar on Suicune is also something that is seen now and then. So I personally like the Indeedee switch up a little bit. It's a bit more reliable of a redirector than some of those other Pokemon, but this is going to be really cool. There have been some Scarfed Enteis running Eruption running around lately, specifically on some Xerneas teams. I'll be interested to see if Flavio is going to bring that. And then also the Venusaur is kind of cool. We've been seeing a little bit of Assault Vest Venusaur action coming into the meta recently, even though it doesn't have that Gigantamax factor, and it's definitely not as threatening as it was in Series 8, it's still a Pokemon that you need to be careful of.
Definitely. And then on Melvin's side of the field, representing Singapore, getting top 4 at the same European International Championships that Flavio won back in 2019, getting top 16 at the World Championships 2 times in a row. Melvin will be running a Zacian team featuring Incineroar, Rillaboom, Urshifu, Zapdos, and Politoed. And to be honest, while I'm not surprised to see the presence of Politoed on the field, on a team that prominently features Zacian, a Pokemon who really struggles against those fire-type matchups. I was not expecting to say that we'd have a Politoed Torkoal matchup playing out for you in Series 10, given how popular the Kyogre and the Groudon have been bringing the same roles. So curious to see how this is going to play out in regards to the other Pokemon on the field, but I would imagine that we'll get at least one game where we'll have a good old classic weather matchup without those Titans.
The other interesting thing about this is, once again, for the second time today, we're seeing the single strike Urshifu, the Dark Urshifu, which has been so much less common in the meta in Series 10. People really starting to gravitate towards the Rapid Strike Water Urshifu, just because it tends to do a little bit better with sort of multi-hitting, going through sashes, as well as just the prominence of Rain. It's been a really interesting sort of series, because Water Urshifu in previous series was kind of relegated to like a colossal support with like sometimes you run it, I guess, but usually it's been all about the Dark Urshifu. But that's been very different in this series. But Melvin's saying, no, you know what? I trust my Dark Urshifu, and we'll see if he's able to make it work a little bit better than Shohei's Dark Urshifu in the last set.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and jump into this game one, as we will be watching this battle from Flavio's perspective, which means we get a nice little sneak peek at some of the items that his Pokemon are holding. Of note, the Torkoal is holding the Assault Vest, which is a very unique item for it, normally running something like a Charcoal to boost those fire type attacks. But the Entei also going to be carrying a Choice Scarf, which means Entei versus Zacian could be an interesting win con for Flavio to play towards, as given that he's locking into the Entei possibly as one of his last Pokemon, definitely has to be on his mind. On Melvin's side of the field, though, you have to wonder if he's thinking similar things about the presence of that Politoed, and especially how Politoed can sort of help power through Pokemon like the Entei. So I can't wait to see how this game is going to play out as we wrap up the week here in the Victory Road World Cup, sponsored by Elgato. Let's go ahead and jump into the game.
Of course, we're going to be watching things from Flavio's perspective, and we'll be seeing Melvin's Pokemon first here. It's going to be the Incineroar Zacian lead, so going straight in with the Zacian, wanting to apply a little bit of pressure potentially to maybe a Xerneas lead, and that's exactly what we're going to see here with the Xerneas and the Incineroar on the other side.
So those Intimidates will certainly help out on both sides of the field, though I think Flavio's Intimidate is going to be a bit more important, as it will negate the Intrepid Sword boost. But I think most importantly, you have to pay attention to the order of these Intimidates. And Flavio's Incineroar was able to Intimidate first, which does lead me to believe that it will be faster than the opposing Incineroar, which means that the Xerneas might not be safe to go for something like a Geomancy this turn. While it certainly could go for a Protect and then try and find that space the following turn, or maybe just go for an attack the following turn, the Zacian is more than capable of still securing that knockout, even without the Intrepid Sword boost that was taken away. So Melvin off to a great start, I think, recognizing that the Zacian put so much pressure on the field prior to the Geomancy being set up by the Xerneas that it's something that Flavio is going to have to respect and really sort of rotate and maybe show his strategy for taking down the Zacian earlier on as a result.
Well, we are going to be seeing the Entei coming on in now. That does apply quite a bit of pressure to the Zacian. As, of course, we mentioned, the Choice Scarf does make it faster than the Zacian, and if something like a Flare Blitz will definitely be able to take it out if Sun comes in the form of Torkoal, but not behind a substitute. So the Protect on the Xerneas is not really going to do anything at all, as, of course, Roar goes through Protect. And it's an early reveal of Roar on the Incineroar, though, so that's going to be some really good information for Flavio going forward in the set.
I think it dictates the order in which you deal with these Pokemon as a result. I still think that you have to target the Zacian because you really don't want it to be comfortable behind that substitute, but knowing that the Incineroar can rely on Roar to remove the Geomancy boosts and force the Xerneas off the field, I think you have to pick up the knockout on that opposing Incineroar before you try and navigate your Xerneas back onto the field. So Flavio's in a spot very early on in this game one where he needs to find 2 knockouts. I don't think Indeedee going to help too much with that, as Indeedee really is meant to support with something like the Follow Me, but the Entei could find those attacks depending on what moves it knows.
Yeah, this is going to be a Flare Blitz coming in right now. Getting rid of that substitute is pretty nice. As you mentioned, you don't really want to let the Zacian sit there comfortably behind a sub. So that's going to be able to deal with that reasonably well. But this is going to be a pretty chunky close combat coming into that Indeedee, dealing a little bit less than half and sort of weakening out that Indeedee is going to be really, really important for Melvin as well, because you don't want to leave the Indeedee in a position where it can allow that Xerneas to get a Geomancy off very, very easily behind a Follow Me.
Yeah, and honestly, by switching out the Incineroar here, you do also ensure that even if the Entei were to be taken out within the next turn or two, and the Xerneas would find a position next to that Indeedee, like you just mentioned, all Incineroar has to do is get back out onto the field, which is very easy when you're dealing with Xerneas, and you're probably having to deal with more than a couple of knockouts in the process to navigate and to get that Roar set up against it. That Incineroar did not take any chip damage, so as a result, it will be able to survive a Moonblast from that Xerneas, regardless if Geomancy is in play. So very good for Melvin to recognize that he needed that Pokemon for later and to rotate it out, despite the fact that it would have also been tempting to go for some sort of dark type attack against this Indeedee and possibly knock it out outright.
This is going to be a really interesting turn because, of course, the Zacian is super threatened by that Entei. The Rillaboom being able to reset the terrain is kind of nice, but Fake Out's not going to work onto an Entei. So this is going to be sort of the question is, does Melvin sort of expect, does he go for a Protect? Does the Protect get red? Does he read into the Entei attacking into the Rillaboom and not Protect? Like, there's a lot of ways this turn can go, and it's kind of going to dictate the way the rest of this game goes. But Melvin opting to play on the safer side, removing the Zacian from the field, going back into that Incineroar, which is going to, I mean, the Intimidate's not going to do very much here, but basically just keeping the Zacian safe there and making sure that if a Flare Blitz does come into that slot, it's not going to do very much.
A double switch from Melvin as well, though. So normally you worry about how much damage are you giving up by doing a double switch, but seeing that it's the Politoed revealed with the Drizzle ability, those Flare Blitz from the Entei aren't going to be dealing much damage, as it looks like Flavio's getting in on the switching action as well.
Well, this is Series 10 in a nutshell, right? A lot of these matches just end up being so positionally focused, so much switching compared to a Dynamax format. And it's gonna go Melvin's way this turn. I do like that he read the dog here. Whoops. He's also trying to get in on the casting. But I did like that the read came in there into the Zacian switching out. But of course, the Rillaboom also switched out, so the Politoed is going to eat that Flare Blitz very, very easily. Leftovers being revealed, and it's effectively not going to do any damage.
No, and this is the exact kind of Politoed I think you want if you're in Melvin's position, because this Politoed is going to be able to sit out on the field. It's going to be able to provide support with Helping Hand, deal big damage, plus bring the burn chance with Scald. I guess not really against fire-type Pokemon, but you know, every little bit of chip damage helps, especially when you're dealing with a Pokemon like Xerneas. So very good information for Flavio to know that Melvin did bring this Politoed, but I think it's still going to be a difficult Pokemon for Flavio to find an opening against. You don't really want to switch your Xerneas in on an attack in any situation, so I think that's just evidence of how much pressure this Politoed brings and how key the Entei is to Flavio's game plan in this game one.
Politoed is really funny, right? Because it's never really, if you're building a team, you're never thinking to yourself, I gotta have a Politoed answer, because you just don't really see it all that often. But the amount of pressure that it's applying to this team just through not being, like, there isn't a great way to remove it from the field. Like, it needs to kind of be hit with like a Moonblast off of a Geomancy or something, because it's so bulky.
It is, and that Scald did so much damage to the Incineroar. Fake Out from Melvin's Incineroar also finding a target as well this past turn, and Flavio does have the opportunity to, you know, try and land a Moonblast here, but I don't think he can safely go for the Geomancy, knowing that the opposing Incineroar has access to Roar. Now, Roar is a sound-based move, and if the Incineroar does have access to Throat Chop, and if Flavio is confident that his Incineroar is going to be faster, that's certainly one out here. But interestingly enough, Melvin electing to switch out that Incineroar and send in the Zacian right as the Xerneas goes for a Geomancy.
What a ballsy Geomancy coming out of Flavio. right in front of that potentially roaring Incineroar. He doesn't care. Brilliant read there, knowing that Melvin was going to not go for the roar. And this is really the mind games coming into effect, right? From Flavio's perspective, you know that Melvin is a really good player. And Melvin, as a really good player who is playing against somebody like Flavio, could easily say like, ah, okay, well, he's gonna go for the he's gonna go for the safe play, right? So I'll play into that. But it actually looked like the Incineroar dropped a throat chop there, so that's another way to deal with roars. So really, really nicely done there by Flavio, revealing a bit of tech on his own. Throat chop, not the most uncommon move on Incineroar, but also not exactly a 100% usage move.
Also, interesting tech on the Politoed as well, having access to Icy Wind. You know, I think that's a very common move for Politoed if you were to run it in a series like Series 10, where it is forced to be a more supportive Pokemon. There's only so much Helping Hand and Scald can do, so by being able to bring speed control as well, you can certainly try and find your Zacian or even your opponent, your own Incineroar, some opportunities to go on the offense prior to your opponents. Unfortunately for Flavio, though, I think this Xerneas is a bit stuck on the field right now. You can't really switch out to a Choice Scarf Zacian or a damaged Indeedee, especially after you get that Geomancy up, and unfortunately Dazzling Gleam looks like it's going to fall short of putting the Zacian into knockout range from a Flare Blitz as it sets up a substitute.
Yeah, really, really interesting play there by Melvin. I guess, once again, we're kind of seeing Melvin as the player who is going for the more safe plays here, while Flavio is just going for it. He's going for reads aggressively, and that was a really good turn for him. Parting Shot doesn't care about that substitute. It's still going to be able to drop the stats of that Zacian. It's still going to be able to get that Incineroar out of the field safely. And the Xerneas, of course, dishing out quite a lot of damage with that Dazzling Gleam. Of course, like one of the things that you might think about is like, oh, okay, well, you know, the Gleam is resisted by the Zacian, but as we saw, it's still going to do so much damage, and that Politoed now under half as well.
Yeah, the Dazzling Gleam on its own might be enough to break the substitute, honestly, given how much damage it did. But still, Flavio has a very tough decision here to make. If you send in the Entei, you can go for an attack against the Zacian, break the substitute, and then have that Dazzling Gleam connect again for damage in the upcoming turn. If you send in Indeedee, you can redirect whatever attacks are going to be thrown your way, but you're most likely going to get knocked out for your trouble, as a Behemoth Blade is more than capable of picking the knockout up on the Indeedee from that range. I think in this scenario, the Indeedee was probably more to get rid of the grassy terrain than anything else. If Politoed had gotten another little bit of health back, it's possible that it would have been healed enough so that Dazzling Gleam was no longer a guaranteed knockout. I think as it is right now, it is a roll, which is most likely why Melvin is switching it out so that it can keep the rain up for the future against that Entei.
Yeah, the Rillaboom is going to take a pretty hefty amount of damage from the Gleam. I'm more interested to see if we're correct about the substitute being broken, but we're not going to see that this time at all. Protect coming in from the Zacian, really trying to secure its position on the field and make sure that one of the ways that you have to play Zacian against these kinds of Xerneas teams, right, is you need to just kind of be patient, work an opening, and then use that opening. So the longer you can keep that Zacian alive, the longer you can keep that substitute alive, the more opportunities you're going to have to try to create that opening that you need. And we're seeing Melvin sort of lean into that now. It's kind of been the way he's been playing this whole game, kind of playing it back, playing it safer, not really minding if the game goes on for quite a long time. But so far, he is having quite a bit of trouble disrupting the game plan of Flavio, as he's just happy to sit here and drop some Dazzling Gleams.
Exactly. I think prior to the Geomancy being activated on the Xerneas, he was in a position where it didn't feel like he was in this responsive play. I think he was actively searching for the advantage. But now that the Xerneas has gotten the Geomancy up and can alternate between Protect and attacks in order to stop any fake out shenanigans that would otherwise slow things down, Xerneas is in the perfect position to go for those Dazzling Gleams to deal damage and just keep the momentum going in Flavio's favor. Even when the Zacian is going to be able to connect an attack to that Xerneas and knock it out, by then the substitute will most likely be gone, and as a result, the Entei can come in and start dealing big damage as well. So Melvin very much still on the back foot, even though this really was his turn to do what he wanted to do.
Yeah, I like the double protect there, just making sure that you can get rid of that fake out pressure. And from here, once again, the Xerneas can just click the Dazzling Gleam button. I am a little concerned about a potential... I think that's Assault Vest Rillaboom, but I'm not 100% sure with the roll on the Dazzling Gleam. If it is Miracle Seed, it may well be able to pick up the Indeedee with a Grassy Glide, so you might be in a little bit of a tough position if Grassy Glide picks up and then the Zacian goes in with the Behemoth Blade. But all we're going to be seeing right now is another Protect off that Zacian. I do like that he's getting quite a lot of the HP back from this grassy terrain. That's working out quite nicely. But we'll see how much damage the Rillaboom can do here to this Indeedee, whether it goes for a U-turn, something like that, whether it even survives the Dazzling Gleam to begin with.
I don't know. No Grassy Glide yet, though, which is something interesting to note as well. But I think that survival confirms the Assault Vest as a U-turn critical hit is enough to knock out the Indeedee in return. Flavio just not getting what he was looking for from that turn.
Yeah, all of a sudden, things are very, very different now because we still have that substitute up. We still have a situation where it's not like the Entei can just go in and win. And with an Incineroar coming back in and still that Rillaboom back in the back, it's actually going to be Politoed coming back in. So we don't actually have any fake out pressure on the field right now. But with that Geomancy up, I believe the Xerneas should be faster than the Scarf Entei. So with the Rain up, maybe Zacian is able to tank a double up from the Dazzling Gleam and the Flare Blitz, but I'm not really sure.
I'm not sure either, honestly, and we'll have to see if that is indeed what Flavio decides to go for. I mean, this Entei looks like it has some interesting support options here as well, with a dark type attack and a ground type attack at its disposal as well. Those will be Stomping Tantrum and Snarl, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, and if it is going to be Snarl, I mean, that will do damage through the substitute as it is a sound-based move. So it would take a couple of those probably to knock Zacian out. So it's probably not as viable as Flavio would want it to be at this point in time. But again, it's certainly an option here, especially if you're worried about the Xerneas' ability to deal damage to the Zacian this turn. It's really unfortunate that those Icy Winds took away the speed boost from Geomancy on that Xerneas previously in the game, because otherwise it would have been faster than the Entei at this point in time, and Entei would have been able to break the substitute for Entei, who would have then been able to KO the Zacian. But those Icy Winds just, never mind. It looks like Entei's just gonna go to break that sub anyways.
Yeah, that's going to be a big moment in this game, but one of the big questions here is whether or not he actually just resets the substitute. Okay, that's one of the benefits of this grassy terrain, giving back more than enough HP to just drop another sub. A safe way to play that out after, of course, protecting last turn, but the Politoed is going to go down in the meantime, taking it to a 3 versus 3 situation here. Melvin's still doing fine, but he's not in what I would call a comfortable position.
No, definitely not. No, I mean, Zacian, it's great that it was able to keep that substitute up on the field, and, you know, Incineroar's presence as the next Pokemon out for Melvin will mean it'll have the opportunity to get one more turn of grassy terrain health back, assuming the Incineroar will use Fake Out to put some pressure down on the field this turn. But Zacian is just running out of time, whereas this Xerneas, despite the fact that it could be knocked out at any moment in time from a Behemoth Blade on Zacian, is still sitting fairly comfortable on the field otherwise. And I think that despite all that Melvin's been trying to do, the fact that Xerneas has been relatively comfortable to continue to go for these Dazzling Gleams is just really starting to add up.
No protect on the Xerneas, no protect on the Zacian. So this might be the turn where we see the Zacian finally go for a big Behemoth Blade. Of course, no Intrepid Sword boost since the Incineroar was able to get a parting shot down on it. We're going to have to see just how much damage this does.
There it is. It's going to connect. This is what Melvin's been waiting for, and unfortunately for Flavio, it still is enough to pick up the knockout.
Yeah, maybe a little bit less of a bulky Xerneas than we saw in the last game. I believe the Xerneas in the last set survived a neutral Behemoth Blade, or maybe even just a more offensively trained Zacian. But that's going to make this a whole heck of a lot easier for Flavio going forward, for Melvin rather, going forward. With those 3 Pokemon, he can continue to come on in, maybe drop a parting shot to weaken that Entei a little bit. He still does have the option to protect on the Zacian this turn, which he is probably going to have to do given the fake out pressure. And something else that's a little interesting is that Flavio is almost out of your time, so he doesn't really have time to think about his moves.
No, I mean, fortunately, he doesn't have to think about his move on that Entei, right? As it is going to be locked into Flare Blitz for the rest of this game. But you're absolutely right that you have to really be using this time in between turns to be planning out your next play. I think that having the Entei locked into Flare Blitz isn't the worst thing in the world, but knowing that Melvin's last Pokemon is going to be that Politoed, I think that does give Melvin a bit of comfort as this matchup starts to wind down. I don't see a way that Flavio is going to be able to knock out both the Incineroar and the Politoed together before time runs out, especially knowing he's locked into Flare Blitz on the Entei.
It's actually Rillaboom in the back, which makes it a little bit more awkward. And of course, one of the things that Melvin could do if he sees himself a solid win condition here is just try to timer stall and maybe drop a close combat on the Incineroar on the last turn or something, but I don't really know if that's the way to go here. He still has 3 versus 2, but with the Rillaboom in the back very, very low on HP, the Zacian very, very low on HP, whatever's in that slot is going down to the Flare Blitz this turn.
Yeah, that's a very important thing to call out, and it's the double protect fails on the Zacian.
And that is pretty massive here. This could be the last turn in the game, perhaps. We're going to have to see how long it takes for these animations to move out. We're also going to have to see how much time Flavio has left, because he doesn't have a full turn of 45 seconds remaining. Throat Chop coming in here. That's going to be a pretty long animation. And then the final animation coming in. That's going to be it. So 35 seconds. Does Flavio have time to timer stall that? Because he wins if they go to timer right now.
Yeah, that Throat Chop absolutely key, stopping the parting shot from the opposing Incineroar. And even though that was less time taken up during the turn, that does mean that Flavio's Incineroar will not be intimidated for the last turn of this game. It does look like Flavio has enough time to stall through the remainder of this turn, but I don't think he necessarily recognizes it, as he has already locked into a move. Melvin, though, taking things down right to the wire.
Yeah, I don't think it really matters at this point. Flavio identifying that the game has been won. A really, really nice endgame there for him, being able to just use that Entei to its fullest power, to the fullest extent of its power, and taking down the win on a 2-2 situation. Not super often that we see a game go to timer, but I feel like sometimes in these Xerneas versus Zacian matchups, it's a little bit more common than some of the others because it's just so positionally focused. The Zacian player is very likely to spend a lot of time clicking the protect button, clicking the substitute button, and just switching around in general. So going to timer for the first time today. We had one almost go to timer earlier on, but yeah, not that it really mattered at that point. If this was a game on Showdown or something, then it still would have ended in Flavio's favor.
Going into game 2, I'm very curious about what adjustments these trainers are going to make, because like you said, it was very positional all the way down to the wire with all those protects and substitutes on the Zacian, and I can't help but wonder, especially given how that game played out, and given that Flavio decided to bring the Indeedee and the Entei as 2 of the supportive Pokemon for the Xerneas, if that's something that Flavio is going to continue into this game too. While I don't think you necessarily bring Torkoal in this matchup, though it must be tempting to have the Sunlight on your side of the field, something like the Venusaur may be an interesting adjustment, as it would allow you to handle that Politoed a bit more comfortably than what we saw in game 1.
Given that the Venusaur is holding that Expert Belt as well, there's a good chance that it's running Earth Power, so it might be able to, it might even be calced to, do X% to Zacian. I don't know if it's capable of KOing it with a non-stab Earth Power, even with the Expert Belt, but an option like that might be an interesting one. One of the things with this Xerneas team is that there's a lot of things that Zacian doesn't really like. Now, usually on paper, you would look at the matchup of Zacian versus Xerneas and say, well, Zacian is the natural enemy of Xerneas, it favors Zacian, but there are just so many Zacian answers on this team, from the Intimidates to 3 different fire types to potentially a Venusaur with Earth Power. There's a lot that makes it very, very difficult for Melvin to position. And he's not going to like these leads either. I think that might have been an Urshifu lead hoping for the Indeedee, although this does kind of provide a bit of an awkward situation where you can only fake out one of these. And the Zacian is very capable of taking out the Xerneas, as we saw with a neutral Behemoth Blade. And the Urshifu is very capable of dishing out solid damage to that Incin with a -1 close combat as well.
You have to wonder, though, knowing that Flavio locked in Entei as one of his Pokemon in the back, how much the Incineroar is going to be relevant in this matchup, and if it's okay if it goes down to something like a fighting-type attack. But instead, U-turn is the move of choice for Melvin after the fake-out connects with that Zacian, giving Melvin the opportunity to adjust immediately at the start of this game, too.
That's actually a very big reveal. U-turn on Urshifu almost definitely shows that that's a Scarf Urshifu, which, you know, is very, very common these days anyway. It's always something you need to take into account when you see an Urshifu on the other side of the field. But that little confirmation there is going to be really, really nice for Flavio, just to know that is almost certainly Scarf, and I need to keep that in mind.
Yeah, Xerneas gets the opportunity to go for Geomancy now. Not gonna have to worry about that Zacian quite yet, but Flavio does have his work cut out for him in turn 2, as Melvin has access to both Fake Out and Roar on that opposing Incineroar. I think this would be a great opportunity for Melvin to use the pressure the Incineroar brings to give Zacian the opportunity to go for a substitute and try and start that slow play that we saw him play with in game 1. The big question for me, though, is whether or not Xerneas is going to be able to attack, or if it's going to get caught with a Roar at the end of this turn for its trouble.
Well, one of my questions is whether or not Zacian is running Sacred Sword or Close Combat, because if it's running Close Combat, I was just thinking, you know, going for Close Combat into the Incineroar, I think we actually may have seen that last game, that's going to open up that Incineroar to just go for Roar. There's nothing that can be done, because, of course, the Zacian is going to outspeed the Broke Chop. Down goes the Incineroar on Flavio's side, and I'd be very surprised to see anything but a Roar coming out, and there it is. What a turn there from Melvin. A little bit of damage coming out from the Dazzling Gleam, but that is a small price to pay to get rid of that Geomancy boost.
Yeah, because Geomancy relies so heavily on the Power Herb item, taking a 2-turn move, bringing it down to a single turn, the fact that Xerneas has been forced off the field so early on means that it will not get access to Geomancy for the remainder of the game. And even though it will be allowed to deal damage, you know, it still is at full health, all things considered. It is not going to be able to attack with as much potency as it could prior. So very well played from Melvin there, recognizing that a Choice Scarf or Shifu with access to U-turn was all the adjustment he needed after that turn 1, and sending in the Pokemon that would allow him to disrupt Flavio's strategy the most. Flavio does have a bit of an interesting decision to make here. You can send in the Xerneas once again and just do little chip damage, just recognizing the fact that, you know, yes, I won't be able to use Geomancy, but this is still Xerneas. It's still a legendary Pokemon, and it's going to have access to some pretty powerful attacks regardless. Or do you reveal the Entei and start going on the offense with that Choice Scarf of your own? The one thing I would worry about for Flavio in this position is that if he keeps Entei in the back for too long, he's going to be stuck in a position where he's going to have to pick a single attack to last him for the remainder of the game, as I don't think Indeedee's going to stick around for too long facing down both Zacian and the Incineroar at once. And unlike the previous game, Melvin still has all 4 of his Pokemon and should be able to play around whatever that Entei decides to lock into.
Well, Helping Hand coming on in, and, you know, with the addition of Fairy Aura, Helping Hand Fairy Aura, this is going to do about as much as a Power Herb boost, Geomancy boost to Dazzling Gleam, so may well be enough to get rid of the Incineroar on the other side of the field. Does not, oh, actually, wow, it does survive. That's very unfortunate for Flavio, and that is a big, big live for Melvin, keeping on that fake out pressure with that Incineroar in the back, getting a free switch out, and of course, weakening that Xerneas even further with that parting shot.
Good information, though, for Melvin to know that that helping hand, even with the boost, is not enough to secure that KO. Like you mentioned, almost equivalent to how much damage Geomancy boost would have done in that position. So if we do see a game 3 in this matchup, I think that's something that's going to be really important to keep in mind. The Urshifu certainly is not comfortable out on the field against the Xerneas, especially with the Indeedee around to offer redirection or otherwise throw a wrench in its plans. But the fact that Zacian is still on the field and is still healthy, I think really dictates how Melvin has to play this turn and how Flavio has to respond to this turn. By leaving the Xerneas on the field, you have to assume that Flavio is comfortable losing it to a Behemoth Blade in this turn, and you have to wonder what he's thinking for a possible endgame with both the Indeedee and the Entei. Oh, well, that did so much damage.
Wicked Blow does a lot of damage here, and we already know that the Zacian is capable of killing the Xerneas. We'll see if it's a roll. Maybe a low roll keeps it alive, but that's not going to be the case this time around, as the Xerneas goes down, and really there's not much left for Flavio to do here. The Entei, the big winner in game number 1, it's going to be really, really nice for him to have, but you know, it's on such low HP. Yeah, you can redirect the Wicked Blow, but what are you gonna do? You can take out the Urshifu and lose to the Zacian, or you can take out the Zacian and then the Urshifu is just gonna go into the next turn. Although the Urshifu is naturally just a tiny bit slower than Entei, so it would have been interesting to see what's actually faster between the two, but Flavio opting to conserve whatever information remains and concede the game. So 1-1, Melvin finding an incredible turn 2 there, falling victim to the turn 1 Geomancy, the fake out Geomancy that's become almost a meme at this point, but having the perfect answer the following turn. And you know, with Zacian teams, sometimes the game goes really, really long. It's all about that positioning, and sometimes it just snowballs a little bit too quickly, a little bit too early, and there's not much that the opposing player can do.
Yeah, I really like the adjustment in play style from Melvin in that game too, because by leading that Urshifu, I think he gave himself a few more outs depending on how Flavio decided to play it. And it really was that adjustment and that roar from the Incineroar that just opened up the entire board position for him. Going into game 3, I think that Flavio has to be very careful about that roar on the Incineroar. You know, we saw him go for it once in game 1. It didn't quite hit its mark. It was able to connect in game 2, and that really was the decisive factor that took all the momentum away from Flavio. You know, I like the Indeedee as a support option for Xerneas, since you do block priority attacks and you also get to you know, have that redirection available to you. But unfortunately, I don't think Indeedee is necessarily the best Pokemon in this matchup when your opponent has access to Urshifu and Incineroar, who really can just power through that Pokemon. So going into game 3, I'd like to see Flavio pick a different support Pokemon for his plan. I don't really know what that Pokemon is, because I'm not sure if Torkoal and Venusaur want to be in this matchup either, but it's just a really tough spot for this Xerneas. Like, on paper, all of these Pokemon are so strong against what Melvin wants to bring, but just not really finding that magic position in that game too.
It's also really interesting that Politoed in game 1, especially, even though Melvin lost, just the threat of the Politoed puts so much pressure on this team of Flavio, because you get rid of the speed boost for the Venusaur, then the Venusaur is very easy to knock out. You make the Torkoal effectively not very useful. You make the Entei a lot less useful. We didn't get to see what the 4th Pokemon was last game, I don't think, on Melvin's side of the field, but I wouldn't be too surprised if that Politoed is still lurking in the back. We have mirrored leads from game 2 into game 3, and we'll see what the difference is this time around. I would imagine Flavio might try to be actually not mirrored leads, rather. We do have the Incineroar back instead of the Urshifu, but we'll see what goes on this turn. It's going to be interesting to see whether or not the Geomancy is early or later, because, you know, sometimes it may feel like for Flavio that he got just a little bit too greedy in that game number 2, and he may look to position just a little bit slower, a little bit more patient.
Yeah, I honestly don't know. I think it's more, I think it's less about your own personal comfort level and more about what you predict your opponent's going to do, because Zacian and Incineroar on their own are more than capable of taking down the Xerneas if given that opportunity. I think that you have to go with your personal comfort here, and if you're comfortable making a read about whether or not you're going to see a Roar or a Behemoth Blade off the bat, you go for that. If you're uncomfortable, then maybe you switch, or maybe you look to that Incineroar to free up a little bit of time for you to find whatever it is that would give you that comfort.
Well, the Incineroar going for the fake out on the other Incineroar might just be a little bit too greedy, though. Looks like the Xerneas is just gonna actually survive, so I guess it is a roll?
Yeah.
That's surviving with quite a bit of HP. It kind of looks like he got close to max rolls in the last 2 games.
Yeah, you know, only Flavio knows how this Xerneas has been trained, but if that was a situation where, you know, it was the 15 out of 16 chance activating every single time for Flavio, he must feel very relieved that this turn finally worked out in his favor.
Yeah, that's really interesting because, so we actually saw, not to read too much into it, we saw Flavio check the stats of his Xerneas in the middle of game 2, and I understand that as a player. I'm sure you do too. If you get hit with 2 max rolls in a row, you might go and check the stats just to make sure you didn't give it a minus defense nature. But that's a really interesting sort of turn of events there. Melvin may have gotten a little bit too comfortable thinking that it was a guaranteed knockout.
Definitely, and I think that does make sense. I mean, a lot of times you have to retrain your Pokemon in between matches, as you only have access to 1, maybe 2 Xerneas if you've played in previous games where Xerneas was available. So always good to double check your stats. Maybe in the middle of the game is too late, but in this case it might have just been a little bit of luck on Melvin's side, and we'll have to see what Flavio's going to do with the opening he's been given.
Well, there's no Protect coming in on the Zacian, and the Incin survives. No Protect on the Xerneas either, but it's a good read initially. The Substitute's going to be coming in from the Xerneas. Is this going to be a Flare Blitz? Yes, it is. Flare Blitz coming right on in, and that's going to be enough to get rid of the Xerneas. A little bit too greedy maybe on the side of Flavio there, not quite getting the Incineroar, even with the recoil there. And now all of a sudden things become very, very difficult once again. We have the Substitute up for that Zacian, and Entei by itself as the lone real reliable damage dealer is going to have its work cut out for it.
You have to wonder how much damage the Incineroar Flavio had on the field prior would have done to the opposing Incineroar if he had just left it in and gone for a Flare Blitz. If it had outsped the opposing Incineroar, that would have secured the knockout, and then the Xerneas would still be around for another turn. But unfortunately, that Indeedee once again taking the field in a situation where it's not really clear what its purpose is. I think that the redirection is a great opportunity for support, and if you bring a Pokemon like Entei in, it can certainly take advantage of it, but you're gonna have to hit that Zacian twice, once to break the Substitute and the other one to do the knockout. Now, one thing we haven't really talked about because it hasn't come up is that Indeedee does get access to Expanding Force, which would do some damage to Zacian and possibly do enough damage to break the Substitute, depending on how these Pokemon are trained. So that might be Flavio's out in this situation. Know that Entei is not going to go down this turn, break the Substitute, and then lock yourself into Flare Blitz to go for that KO the next turn.
Well, we do see the Protect, so the Substitute is safe, but the Flare Blitz comes into the Incineroar, so finally that's going to be removed from the field. One of the things that you mentioned as well about the, redirect is really nice for Xerneas, right? But what does it really do for Entei? One of the things that also concerns me is redirecting with the Indeedee is just asking for it to go down in 1 or 2 turns. And at that point, Entei is stuck on the field. If Politoed is sitting in the back, it's going to be really difficult for this Entei to actually do anything. But with the Urshifu coming in, I'm not sure that Politoed is the one in the back here. Although, Scarf Urshifu probably is going to one-hit KO that Indeedee. So, Politoed, again, I keep mentioning Politoed, but if it's in the back, that's going to be a very, very difficult situation for Flavio to overcome.
And you have to wonder if you're in Melvin's shoes, if you want to switch that Politoed in to start playing that mind game, excuse me, or do you just leave it in the back and let it take the field naturally? I think given that Zacian is still very healthy on the field, given that the Urshifu should be able to move first as well, you just sort of let things play out. But if Flavio is able to, I mean, this Intimidate's going to be huge against that Urshifu if it decides to forego the critical hit guaranteed move that it has access to. But yeah, this is a tough spot for Flavio, definitely.
And going into the Entei is very safe there. You know that you're just going to KO the Indeedee anyway if the Follow Me comes out. So really, really nicely decided there. And Zacian may even be able to pick up the KO on the Entei if Melvin decides to double into it here. Close combat into the Incineroar is another option. We'll have to see what it's going for. That is close combat, but it is going into the Entei. And with that, things have just gone from bad to worse for Flavio. It is a 3v2 with two incredibly strong opponents facing down. Effectively, the Incineroar and Indeedee are not exactly the damage dealers you brought to win a 2v3, are they, Gabby?
They really aren't. And while this Indeedee would be able to do a nice chunk of damage to Urshifu's Rapid Strike counterpart, Expanding Force will not be able to deal damage to Single Strike because of that dark typing. So Flavio definitely not out for the count, as you do have access to Fake Out, and Helping Hand can certainly swing some damage calcs in your favor, but I think is really going to struggle to find those opportunities. If the Zacian decides to remain on the field and goes for a second close combat into the Incineroar, and the Incineroar is able to hold on, a Helping Hand Flare Blitz should be enough to knock it out, but then you have to wonder how much recoil damage you're going to take. Is that going to be enough? And then there still is the question of that last Pokemon. So Flavio locking in a forfeit, seeing the writing on the wall, and Melvin Key taking the win for Singapore this week in this final match of World Cup.
Yeah, that makes it a 4-4 overall. So Singapore successfully taking a point off of Italy is very, very good. And the unfortunate thing, if you're a fan of Panama, is I believe that has consigned Panama to elimination. So our condolences to Panama. But now Italy, Singapore, and Indonesia will continue to battle it out for those top two spots going into week number 3. It's going to be really interesting to see who comes out on top there. Italy comes into the tournaments one of the favorites. They've had a lot of incredibly strong weeks. This wasn't necessarily one of them, but then you have Singapore, who have been doing progressively better as well. They've also had some really great results, including this one where they took a 4-4 against Italy. But then on the other side of things, you have Indonesia, who kind of seem like the dark horses in that race, because they did just 8-0 Panama. So if you're Singapore, you've got to be a little bit concerned about that Indonesia matchup, even if you're kind of riding that high of the tie versus Italy.
Definitely. And I think it goes to show you as well in these longer format tournaments is you can't necessarily count somebody out until they have been eliminated from the tournament. I mean, the fact that we've had multiple 8-0 runs this week, in addition to multiple matches that came down to the wire on stream nonetheless, just goes to show how much talent there is in this tournament. And I cannot wait to see how things are going to shake up in week 3, because as we keep progressing, it's only going to get harder and harder for these countries.
Yeah, and we're already seeing some really incredible storylines developing for week 3. So you guys are not going to want to miss it next week here, Friday, Saturday, Sunday on the Victory Road VGC stream. And I'm really excited to watch what happens. And going into the round of 16, things are going to be really interesting. Not all of the seeding is going to be exactly what we thought. That one of the things that really jumps out to me as a prospective match is if Japan makes it out in second, they'll play Italy if Italy wins that group. So Japan-Italy is a potential round of 16 match. That's insane. There's so many cool things going on in this tournament, and it's all made possible thanks to the sponsors at Elgato. So big shout outs to them, and of course, the organizers here at Victory Road.
Yeah, so that's going to be all for us this week. Again, thank you so much for watching. Thank you to Victory Road for having us. Thank you to Elgato again for sponsoring us. We will see you starting next Friday for the week 3 of this round of the tournament. So stay tuned, everybody. Till then, we'll be signing off. Enjoy the rest of your day.